Hello and welcome to our next session of Fireside Chat with Lieutenant General Alexis Grinkowicz, the commander of U.S. Air Force's Central. In his role, General Grinkowicz oversees operations in 21 countries that are part of the U.S. Central Command area responsibility, which I'll note at the top include Syria and Iran. General Grinkowicz joins us today from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. So I want to throw it over to him first for some opening remarks. General, over to you.
Hey everybody, first off I just want to say thanks for inviting me here today and I'm excited to talk on what I view as an extremely important topic. I'm also humbled by looking at the other folks who have provided keynotes in the past and have provided keynotes for this conference and am honored to be considered amongst them here speaking to you today. So I just really appreciate it. So I wanted to start out with that. Thanks. As I mentioned, I think this is a really important topic as we talk about the role of commercial innovation and how that's affecting warfare and how it's changing. And I'll give you a couple of thoughts on that kind of at the open here before I go into some of the details on what we're doing in AFCENT. The first is, the change is happening extremely rapidly right now. And people have probably always said that since the beginning of time, but I do feel that the acceleration of change has occurred, primarily driven by digital technologies, data-centric technologies, and that evolution that we're all going through right now in the information age. I'd also tell you that I think as military professionals, when we look at that change and what we think it means and portends for the future of warfare, the implications of it may not be exactly what we think they are. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm a military historian by training and trade, but if I go back and think about what Clausewitz said, the role of a general, the first and most important role of a general, is to perceive and understand the nature of the battle in which they're about to embark. And again, I think that it's extremely important for us to reflect deeply about the changes that we're seeing around us, about the transformations in technology, and to try to understand exactly what that means in terms of what kind of battles we'll be fighting in the future. It's absolutely essential that we get this right. I'll also bring another concept in here up front, and that is, it comes from a book called How the War Was Won, written by an author, Phillips O'Brien, a British author. And Phillips will tell you that if you look at the battles of World War II, it wasn't the actual Battle of Stalingrad or the Battle of Midway that mattered. They certainly mattered in the sense that they were turning points of the war, but that turning point only manifested because of things that happened before, over the previous years. Easiest to talk about in the European context, but think of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic allowed us to move troops and equipment unfettered into Europe. It allowed us to have weather stations across the North Atlantic that allowed us to make the final decision about the date that we would invade Normandy. Without the Battle of the Atlantic, the Battle of Normandy would never have been won. And without the Battle of Normandy, we would never have been able to enter the continent of Europe and defeat Nazi Germany. So Phillips O'Brien posits that what really mattered in World War II were what he coined super battlefields, battlefields that extended in space and time across a much larger geography and across a period of years rather than just the days of battles that happened at specific locations. What I would argue is that we're facing a similar dynamic today, except the battlefield has grown in geography. It now covers the entire globe. It covers areas off of the globe. It covers cyberspace. It covers out into highly elliptical orbits, and then perhaps beyond that in space. And so it's also expanded in time. And if we think about winning the war, whatever conflict that is that we envision happening amongst great powers at some point in the future, and we can think of a number of those challenges that we face as we focus on strategic competition, if we're going to win whatever that future war is, we need to think about the battles that are going on now. What's today's analogy of the Battle of the Atlantic? And how do we, again, going back to Clausewitz and bringing this all together, how do we make sure that we perceive the battle that we're in today appropriately so that we win it and therefore win the war should that war actually come. So with that as kind of the framing for my thinking, I'd like to talk to you about what AFCENT's role in this is. If we're focused on China, and China, as our Secretary of the Air Force says, rightly in my view, China is a near-term or longer-term existential threat to the United States. At some point, they're going to challenge the rules-based international order. They're already challenging it in a number of ways. So if we're focused on China, why is a guy from the Middle East sitting here talking to you today? Why is what I say matter about the future of warfare? I'll give you a couple of thoughts on that just to frame what I'll talk about in terms of my view of these new technologies and the innovation that commercial entities are bringing to the fight. First off, there's basically three reasons why I think you ought to care about what I have to say. The first is, if there's any region in the world that's going to take us off our focus on the national defense strategy and focusing on China, it's the Middle East. If there were a violent extremist attack on one of our homeland of our close ally or partner here in the central region, it could derail our focus on China. If war were to break out with Iran, if we're unsuccessful in deterring them or shaping their behavior so they don't pursue a nuclear weapon, that could take us off our strategy to focus on China. If you go to the national security strategy, one level up from the national defense strategy, what that document will tell you is that part of America's objective is to ensure that we don't have any other region of the world break out into a major crisis that cause us to lose focus on that longer term threat that the Chinese represent. The second reason I think it matters what we're doing here in the Middle East is because China thinks the Middle East matters. So China gets 42% of their hydrocarbon resources through the Straits of Hormuz. They're dependent on natural gas exports from this region. They consider this area key terrain. It allows them access to those energy resources. It also allows them access over sea and land-based lines of communication into Africa. And Africa is where you're going to find a variety of rare earth minerals that are going to be useful if you're building advanced military applications. It also allows them access to the markets of Europe, and it allows them to further their economic objectives. Where the Chinese economic objectives begin, their military interests will follow. And so if you just want to engage in a useful thought experiment, at least it's useful for me, imagine that the Chinese are able to displace American influence and the Persian Gulf turns into a Chinese lake. And think about what the implications are for that from a security standpoint, both long-term, and think about what the implications of that would be in terms of what sort of options you might have off-axis should war break out in the Indo-Pacific. What things would you not be able to do that you might be able to do today? Finally, the third thing that I'd like to talk about with respect to why what we're doing in AFCENT matters in the bigger picture is the problems we face in AFCENT today are very much analogous to what we face in the Indo-Pacific. If you look at the tactical problem in the Indo-Pacific, it's thousands of ballistic missiles that can rain down hate on our bases in the first island chain, and they're protected by an advanced air defense system. It's what we've typically called an area defense and denial strategy. So that strategy, that anti-access strategy that forces us to move back to our second island chain is one that has been adopted around the world. And so if you look at Iran, they're employing an anti-access aerial denial strategy as well. They have thousands of ballistic missiles and they're protected by advanced air defense capabilities. So the tactical problem that we face is extremely similar. So the lessons that we learn here in AFCENT as we look at that tactical problem, as we focus on that tactical problem after years of thinking just about violent extremist organizations, the lessons that we learn, I would posit, are exportable across the entire globe. So with that, what I'd like to do is talk to you about what sort of things we can do in our sandbox. So because what we face is very similar to the Indo-Pacific, because we're in a combat environment on a day-to-day basis, I would tell you we do have a sandbox here in the Middle East. It's a place where we can experiment, where we can evaluate new technologies, where we can try new tactics, techniques, and procedures, and see if there is something that we can learn that would be exportable to the Chinese fight at some point in the future. So the lessons that I learned about commercial innovation and how that applies and how we might be able to use that in our sandbox, I would tell you go back to several years ago when I led an enterprise capability collaboration team focused on air superiority in 2030 and what sort of technologies the Air Force might need in a family of systems should we want to maintain air superiority in a future fight. What I learned, and the big takeaway without going into all the specifics of the AS 2030 study, what I learned during that is that there is a tremendous power When you bring together operators, you bring together acquisition professionals, you bring together technologists, and you get them all in the same room. And you are now able to combine a variety of disciplines that are able to push your technological thinking forward and how you might apply it, even more importantly, in warfare. So that is where our AFCENT focus is today, is on bringing those types of people together so that we can innovate and think our way through exactly how we would fight this very challenging fight that we're facing here in this region and frankly in others around the globe as well. So there's really three things that we're doing here in this sandbox and three things that we're doing with the help of the commercial sector, with the help of academia and others as we focus our efforts. The first of those is we have embarked on a journey to transform the AFCENT headquarters into a digital headquarters. So I call it our digital transformation of the AFCENT headquarters. Foremost for me, this is a change of our culture. It is making sure that leaders of all levels, senior leaders, junior leaders, and everything in between that are serving on the AFCENT staff and in all the formations that report to us have a basic understanding of data, a basic data literacy. They don't have to be data scientists, but we need to understand the tools that are around us. We need to understand the environment in which we're operating. And that environment is one that is data heavy and data centric in my view. Without that understanding, we will not even perceive the problems that are facing us or the opportunities that we could exploit moving forward. I'll also tell you that we need to understand not just the data, but we need to have an understanding of artificial intelligence that moves beyond the buzzword. We need to understand the basics of how artificial intelligence algorithms work, how machine learning actually occurs. We need to understand the basics of the architecture. We need to understand things like computer vision. We need to understand how you train algorithms and how you get them to do what you want, the biases that might be inherent in those algorithms. If we don't have that foundational understanding of these key technologies that are emerging, again, we're not going to fully understand the operational environment in which we're operating. The way that we build this headquarters, this literacy in these key areas, the way that we do this digital transformation of the headquarters is really in partnership with academia, like I mentioned, and I hope in the next coming weeks I'll be able to announce the formation of an extremely robust and formal partnership that AFCENT will have with a leading educational institution to help us on this journey of changing our culture. But it's also bringing in commercial vendors, helping us with a couple of other areas where we need assistance as we transform. So one of those is data governance. This is making data visible, making it accessible, making sure it's linked, that it's trusted, that it's interoperable, and that it's secure. That's a lot of stuff to do. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of different kinds of data that we deal with at AFCENT. There's business data, the money, the processes that just kind of keep a complex and a large headquarters of an organization like ours running. So all this business data. There's intelligence data, which is actually fairly well structured data. There's a number of databases that information lives in, and there are ways that we can access it. And then finally, there's operational data, which I would best describe to you as unstructured, disparate, not in one particular location, or colloquially, you could just say it's a hot mess. And so we have got to get our arms around all three of these different data streams and think about what are the governance standards, how are we going to structure this data so that it can meet all of those attributes that I talked about and get it to a point where we can now start to exploit it, where we can now start to put applications on top of this data that can understand it at a deeper level, give us insights into the data rather than having humans sift through it constantly trying to gain those same insights. How do we automate some of that process and gain a deeper understanding of what's going on in the environment around us? That requires kind of the third part of this transformation, which is a change to our infrastructure. So we all talk about, hey, put things in the cloud, a cloud-based infrastructure, your data should live in the cloud, your applications should be able to access the cloud, et cetera. That briefs really well, but it's really difficult when you're distributed across 6,500 miles between your rear headquarters and your forward headquarters. And that distance induces a latency in the functioning of our applications that can be extremely frustrating to a user, that can slow down your processes, can slow down your decision making. So we're really doing a lot of thought about what is that cloud-based architecture. It's not as easy as just buying space on-demand space from a commercial vendor necessarily. There are places and ways we need to think about where that cloud actually lives and how we would get to it. And then, of course, there's all the host of applications that live on top of that software infrastructure that allows us to access that information in real time. And then there's the infrastructure in terms of our own internal business processes, our own internal warfighting processes, and how those work on top of this data layer, if you will. So again, there's a lot to unpack between culture, between governance, and between infrastructure on this transformation that we're going through at AFCENT, but we couldn't do it without commercial innovation. It is commercial innovation that is driving our change. It is commercial innovators coming to us with cloud solutions that meet our specific needs. It's commercial vendors coming to us with new algorithms that can make sense of the data, or new ideas about how we might be able to leverage the data that we have, and there's a lot of it that we may not have thought of. It's commercial vendors coming to us and talking about how they can offer courses on data literacy that might propel us forward. And as I mentioned, there's partnerships with academia that are extremely important in this regard. And the linkage between academia and the commercial sector and the military sector here is something that's really powerful, and we're trying to exploit that iron triangle, if you will. Okay, so moving beyond the culture of change toward this digital transformation that I talked about, I'd like to talk about the second area where we're applying commercial innovation, and that's in our targeting processes. And if years ago you were studying air power, you would have come across a gentleman named Philip Meilinger, and he wrote 19 propositions regarding air power, and one of them, as I remember studying as a young captain, was that air power is basically targeting, and targeting is basically air power. And what he meant by that wasn't just blowing things up when and where we want it, although that's a big part of it, but how do we pair the thing we want to affect with the way we want to affect it? And as we think about that, and we think about the system that we're challenging in a military context, we have to think about targeting. And the targeting process that we have, frankly, is it's industrial, it's cumbersome, it's slow, and it's not leveraging the kinds of technologies that we've been talking about here today. So we have a series of experiments that are ongoing, a series of exercises using the results of those experiments that we're driving forward, where we're using artificial intelligence to help us enable target discovery, to look at a variety of classified and open source available feeds of information and cue us to where particular targets might be. We're using artificial intelligence to help us think through what kind of options we might want to present to the commander of U.S. Central Command, and from him up to the Secretary of Defense, trying to make sense of that option space. Think of it as when you're looking for options on where you're going to get gas, you're able to go into whatever your map application of choice is and ask it for gas stations that are along your route, and it'll give you options. And you might choose one because you've got that gas station's credit card, you might choose one because it's closer, you might choose one because the price is lower, but it's presenting those options to you. We're doing the same sort of thing from a targeting perspective, where, hey, you might want to go after this target in this manner, or you might want to go after a different target in an entirely different way. Maybe one was kinetic, one was non-kinetic. Give me those options, and artificial intelligence with human oversight, with humans on the loop, reviewing those options can be a powerful way to rapidly develop a decision space for our senior leaders. And then the last thing I'll say is automation, automation, and automation. As we look at this targeting process, as I mentioned, it's an industrial-based targeting process. It's driven by email, it's driven by SharePoint sites. It is not something that had a lot of automation in it. Using new tools and new technologies brought to us by commercial vendors, using a suite of kill chain automation that the Air Force has been working on for a long time, we're able to bring disparate streams of intelligence together rapidly, and we're able to build workbenches so we can very rapidly move ourselves through pushing information to decision makers all throughout the process and rapidly gain a superior pace and a superior scale of targeting compared to anything we've done in recent memory. So there are some unexpected insights that we've gotten from this. We're moving so fast and we're able to develop so many targets that we have found we actually need more analysts looking at the target sets instead of less. but the number of targets per analyst has increased 10 or 20-fold as we do so. So there is still a human dimension to this. We still have a human that's now no longer having to do the hunting for the target, but they do the verifying of the target once we see it. And because of the volume of targets that the machines are giving us, you need more humans there to QC that work. I think that's a good news story. And of course, you could meter that depending on the pace of your campaign and the scale of the campaign you were looking at. The next thing that I would tell you is we're learning that to C2, to command and control that number of targets, to get them pushed actually to someone who is going to generate an effect against them, whether that's a fighter or a bomber that's dropping a kinetic weapon, or an electronic warfare platform that's employing maybe a cyber mission team that's employing a cyber tool against them, to command and control to C2 at scale with that requires an entirely different approach when it comes to bandwidth. And it especially applies if you're talking about a distributed organization, if you're talking about distributed forces, for those of you familiar with things like agile combat employment, where our bases basically disperse to clusters to reduce the threat, complicate enemy targeting using their ballistic missiles. We are going to be spread out, and we're going to be executing what we call mission command, which is giving intent and letting folks at the tactical edge make decisions. To do that, you need a lot of bandwidth, and you need it to be persistent, and you need it to be available and secure. So new technologies such as that are provided by commercial vendors that were not things that we set a requirement for, but we should have thought of it, but we didn't, and someone brought it to us instead. Things like a persistent low Earth orbit satellite communications network, something akin to Starshield. Those sorts of technologies are now transforming the way we execute command and control and giving us options to execute that command and control at echelon across all of AFCENT. That's exciting to me that we're able to do something like that and actually execute at the scale that our targeting process is transforming to. So again, couldn't do any of this without commercial innovation in the background. It's responsive vendors that are sitting there giving us new hardware, such as the satellites and the persistent LEO constellations, giving us new hardware in terms of sensors and an airborne layer that are able to detect targets. It's vendors that are bringing forward new algorithms to help us to try to make sense of the data that we've got. All of that is dependent on that commercial innovation, and leveraging that commercial innovation and bringing it into a partnership with us has been what has enabled our success. All right, the last area that I want to cover in terms of transformation, conscious that I'm running out of time here, is in the field and the things that we're doing with an organization I call Task Force 99. So Task Force 99, a shameless copy of the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet, when they stood up Task Force 59, focused on digital and unmanned technologies on the surface of the sea and under the surface of the sea in order to build maritime domain awareness and give additional options to the Fifth Fleet commander and the commander of Central Command when it came to maintaining maritime security. We shamelessly adopted that approach, and now we're looking at digital and unmanned technologies that help provide air domain awareness for us in the air component, that help us to develop and find hard targets, to build that airborne layer of collection that I talked about previously, and to impose costs and dilemmas on our adversaries. Again, we're focused on digital and unmanned technologies, and the last piece of it is, this is a now thing. This isn't what can we do in a couple years. This is what is available today, and what can I leverage today to solve the problems that I have today. Could not do that if there weren't off-the-shelf technologies that commercial vendors had brought to bear. I'll just give you one quick example of what we've been able to do. We have been able to purchase an off-the-shelf technology, a small UAS, about a meter wingspan, meter to 2 meter wingspan, high fidelity camera on board, and we have employed this UAV in combat, under combat conditions, and it's gone out and done ISR for us at an altitude that other UAVs, such as our medium altitude remotely piloted aircraft, MQ-1s, MQ-9s, would not be able to do. It's given us better imagery than we could get off of any other commercially based capability, whether on orbit or airborne. And it's of such high fidelity that we can now load that imagery into software, put on a set of 3D immersive goggles, if you will, and walk through the terrain, explore the battle space as if we were right there on the ground. Talk about helping you understand the target better, understand what it is that you're working to affect. A tremendous technology. And again, we just stood up Task Force 99 less than 10 months ago, and they've already used this capability in combat to develop targets for the combatant commander's consideration. I think that's a tremendous success story and one that I'm really proud of. Okay, so with that, what I'd like to do is go back to the questions that we started with, and that's to think about how is commercial innovation changing how we operate? It's transforming it, quite frankly. It is bringing things to bear that we would not be able to get through traditional acquisition processes faster. It's bypassing our requirements process. It's letting us know that we had requirements that we may not have even perceived because the technology is changing at that pace. And so again, if I pair that now with going back to Clausewitz and our responsibilities as senior leaders to understand the type of battle that we're fighting, and I pair that with what Phillips O'Brien said about the extension of battlefields in time and space, what I would tell you is the kind of battle that we're in is a battle for who can transform the fastest, who can take advantage of these new technologies more rapidly than the other, who is going to be able to change their thinking about the way of warfare in the future faster than the adversary. It is that is going to be essential to our success in the future. And in my view, whoever wins this battle, this pre-battle, if you will, this battle for transformation, is going to be who wins the war. So with that, I'll pause, and I very much, again, thank you for your time.
So you just talked about Task Force 99 and what they're doing. Are they working across your entire area of responsibility? Are they just focusing on a certain region or part country? And more broadly, what needs to happen to get to the point where something like what Task Force 99 is doing right now is more broadly available, across your command and the entire Air Force, for that matter?
Yeah, Marcus, that's a great question. So the tasks that I've given Task Force 99 are not geographically constrained. So they are responsible for a look across the entire area of responsibility. They have grown rapidly. I would tell you that I think as they grow, as they've grown rapidly to this point, we have, I'll say, more than a dozen UAVs of various types that are on hand now. We have dozens more that will be delivered in the next few months. The pace of change that they're affecting is accelerating. So while they have been constrained in the geography that they've been able to affect thus far, over time, they are going to grow. We are at an inflection point, I would argue, where over the next 6 months, 12 months, we're going to see a significant logarithmic growth in their capability. That logarithmic growth is going to drive us to a conversation about, is Task Force 99 the incubator, and now we push those technologies to other task forces, other organizations, our Air Expeditionary Wings right across the region. How do we, as that volume grows, it's going to change our concepts for command and control of this fleet. So those are questions to be answered from a warfighting perspective. Just here in AFCENT. If we think more broadly about the Air Force, my approach is, if you build it, they will come, is one way you could say it, or everyone likes a winner. So as Task Force 99 is successful, and as we see this model really change the way we're doing business and or give us additional options that we might not have perceived had we not had an organization like Task Force 99, it will become something that is replicated across the globe by other air components, and frankly, other services will do the same thing. So by having a place where commercial vendors can come in with all the types of professionals, operators, engineers, technologists, acquisition professionals, I think we're building that. The key is going to be understanding how to scale it. And so there's much more work to do there, but I do think that success is going to drive that work at a very rapid pace.
I want to unpack a little bit. You talked about the transformation at your headquarters. I'll note I was there 15 years ago at, I guess what I guess is still known as the Combined Air and Space Operations Center. Can you talk a little bit about the types of technologies you need to actually, take part in that modernization? I know you talked about the training of the folks who are there and organizing data sets. Is it something beyond that within, computer systems or anything else? Anything you could talk about there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would start. I'll start at the kind of the software layer and work from there. So we have a suite of tools. If you were here in the time frame you were talking about, if we were doing planning, it was probably done on a whiteboard or a chalkboard where we were mapping out where is one aircraft going to fly, how's it going to show up at one location or another, how is the tanker going to meet this set of fighters or that set of fighters, where's the optimal place for them to go. And this was all done manually. Several years ago, probably almost a decade now, some folks from that were tech savvy, I'll say, walked through, saw some of the whiteboards and go, man, I could build an algorithm that could do that much quicker than you guys are doing it right now. That has led to a suite of tools that are a suite of cloud-based applications that has transformed how we create the air tasking order, which is our order that has traditionally been built on a 72-hour process that allows us to map out where every aircraft's going to be. Tremendously complex when you're talking about hundreds of sorties a day. And even today, we have hundreds of sorties a day that are ongoing here in Air Forces Central. And so that suite of tools has been extremely useful. We've got that to build our operational schema maneuver. We have had young airmen who have on their own designed tools that access intelligence databases and script out target packages and are able to automatically generate those. And then we've got those automation tools I talked about a little bit in terms of the workbenches that are automating our targeting process and the algorithms that are generating that. Foundational to success in our transformation is going to be tying all of those together in some way. So I'm not interested in commercial technologies that don't allow me to build an API that gets these different tools talking to each other. I'm not interested in someone coming to me and saying it's the software is too proprietary to allow us to import or ingest data or talk back and forth across systems, because I need all of these things talking together if I'm going to leverage the data that we have and the processes that we have. So that's kind of point one. As you might expect with these kind of new applications, we need to rethink what our architecture is. Right now, we have a series of basically desktop computers. Some are actual computer systems that are just sitting there. Some go back to a server and they actually are accessing a virtual computer that's on a server somewhere. But either way, we're really kind of a desktop-based architecture. In my view, that limits what we're able to do. And until we get to the point where we have mobility with these applications, where we can have them on some sort of a tablet and move around and access at will that information and have it at our fingertips no matter where we are, still keeping it secure and whatnot, we're going to limit the human-machine interactions that are going to make this optimal. So I think there is a transformation. It's going to take a little bit more time of that layer of the architecture. Then the last layer is the server-based architecture. You mentioned the Air and Space Operations Center here, that shorthand is the CAOC. The CAOC is actually now a distributed entity, unlike when you were here where everything was in one location. We have distributed elements of this all the way back to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. And so different functions are performed at Shaw, different functions are performed here, and we've got to come up with a cloud-based architecture that allows us to work seamlessly and reduce the latency in our processes and in those applications as they access data across 6,500 miles. So there's a lot of hard work to be done here. It's all solvable, and we've got the right people to do it, and we've got the right partnerships to do it.
How much is the AI and machine learning being used in your targeting right now? I remember when this was first being talked about through, I believe it was Project Maven a number of years back. Is that still actually even a thing now that I think that's still being used, or is it, I guess, beyond that? And I guess what needs to happen to make sure other commands, I guess, have access to this type of technology more broadly? And just lastly, what's being done to make sure that the technology is being used responsibly?
Yeah, no, great questions. So a couple of things. So yes, we are still using the Maven Smart System. We have a great relationship with the vendor. General Kurilla has been really driving this from the CENTCOM headquarters and pushing for changes to the Maven Smart System that meet his requirements and meet the component commander requirements for this. So the Maven Smart System is kind of the final overlay where we do a lot of the processing, a lot of the visualization, and a lot of the AI actually sits there that is helping to bring targets together. But I'll tell you, there is a lot more that goes on behind it. So there is a target workbench that the Air Force has been working on, or a kill chain automation suite of tools. And that suite of tools is feeding into the Maven Smart System. So you might think of this as a series of automation tools that look at all the different intelligence disciplines. It might be signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, it might be imagery intelligence, both highly classified, super high fidelity imagery intelligence, or commercially available digital imagery. All of those things go through this kill chain automation suite of tools, gets fused now into the Maven Smart System with another layer of AI, and that's what's really allowing our target discovery. As far as the responsible application of these tools, that's an excellent point. There's a couple of things that we're able to do that actually I think enhance our ability to do things like protect civilians, ensure that there's not collateral damage, damage to protected facilities, et cetera. We are now able to automate some of those processes, and when we automate it, by that I mean we can go into the intelligence databases when we have a geolocation of a particular target, and we can scan automatically for is there a protected facility nearby, say a mosque, a church, or some sort of a medical facility, a school, those sorts of things. That now emerges from the data much more readily and with much less of an error rate than a human looking at it and trying to ascertain if something is within what we would call the collateral hazard area, or the range where weapons falling on that target could cause damage. So that's helping us. And then, as I mentioned, we do continue to increase the number of analysts we have. So as the target discovery and this analysis of the collateral hazards comes in from the algorithms, we still have a human looking at it and doing verification. And there's ways that you can go, hey, this is in a really dense area, so we need to put more attention on it. This is out in the middle of the desert. We know there's nothing else nearby. The human doesn't have to look at it quite as often or quite as closely. There's things like that we can build in that help us. And then we also still require a full legal review of every target that comes through the target workbench. So again, what I would describe this as, it's not that we're taking humans out of the loop, but we're putting humans on the loop and having the AI feed those humans better, higher quality data that they are then verifying, QCing, and applying human judgment to on top of what the robots have done for us.
So you mentioned at the top China and kind of, hey, why are we talking to a guy here in the Middle East? Well, we talk about China, we talk about strategic competition. You are involved, it seems, every single day in strategic competition right now with Russia in Syria. And I was just hoping you can maybe talk about some of your takeaways from that strategic competition and what you're observing and what you're learning.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about Russia and China if I could. So I would say that strategic competition with Russia right now does manifest, as you mentioned, primarily in Syria. And there is a fairly heavy military dimension to it based on the Russian group of forces that's in Syria and based on operating in close proximity to them with coalition forces. I would tell you, this is one place where combatant command lines aren't helpful. And so we have done everything we can and have been very successful at coordinating across the line with U.S. European Command at the CENTCOM level. And then I talked to General Hecker, the Air Component Commander up in United States Air Forces in Europe, more than I talked to any other air component commander around the globe. And it's because of the confluence of Russian activity. He's got the preponderance of it. The center of gravity of what Russia's doing right now is, of course, in Ukraine. But we see that manifesting here. It manifests in a couple of ways. The first is, if you're going to give medals to Russian fighter pilots for pouring gas on a UAV and then knocking it out of the sky by crashing into it while they're operating over the Black Sea, then the Russian pilots that serve in other parts of the world, such as Syria, see that, and that's going to incentivize them. So, for the life of me, I don't know why the Russians give a medal to someone who makes such an egregious mistake and has such a lack of airmanship. It reflects a decline in the professionalization of their Air Force, in my view. But they've done it, and now we see similar aggressive behavior. Not quite to that degree yet, but we see very aggressive behavior out of their pilots. We're trying to maintain a de-escalatory posture. We do maintain that de-escalatory posture, but the Russians continue to try to pressure our presence. I'll tell you, I also think this is driven by a confluence of our adversaries now. So with Russia being beholden to Iran, with the mighty Russian Air Force having to buy UAVs from Iran, the Russians actually owe the Iranians something. And so that dynamic, I think, has resulted in collusion, if you will, between the Russians and the Iranians, both of whom want to see us out of Syria. They're colluding with the Syrian regime and trying to push us out of Syria as quick as they can. And for the life of me, I don't know why they've come off the reason that we're all actually there, which is to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. That's the real threat. That's the real enemy to all of us, and that's what we ought to be focusing on in Syria. But for whatever reason, the Russians and the Iranians and others are coming off of that. So competition is manifesting with a stark military dimension in that regard. I would tell you, though, we are in competition with China here and in competition with them a lot. As I mentioned, China sees this as key terrain. They are trying to gain influence in the region. They are trying to sell their weapons. And when you buy a weapon from someone, you buy a relationship with them. I'll tell you, I think the relationship you buy when you buy Chinese is not that good. It's an exploitative relationship. It's a transactional relationship. If you buy equipment from the United States, you're buying a 30-year partnership. Not just that transactional relationship. So we continue to work with our partners here, building interoperability, working with them to robust their defenses, assuring them that we've got their back if things turn south here with respect to Iran. Many of them are concerned about the same things we're concerned about. The Iranian tentacles that spread across this region with their Quds Force and their threat network of proxies and partners operating in the region and sowing instability, and of course their nuclear program, which, as the president has said multiple times, we won't allow them to have. So there's plenty of things that we're all worried about. There's plenty of shared interests here, and our ability to assure our partners, work with them, build interoperability is a key element of strategic competition that displaces that Chinese influence here.
So just as we wrap, you made some headlines last month when you told me in an interview that the Russians had been trying to bait some U.S. jets into dogfighting over Syria. Have you seen anything different in their behavior of late?
No, I haven't, unfortunately. We continue to press that behavior, but I'll tell you that just in the last few days and most recently this morning, the Russians continued to engage in that kind of provocative behavior. So again, we maintain a de-escalatory posture. I think that what they don't understand is that they have very limited options. We're the United States of America. We've got a lot more options in terms of the forces that we could bring to bear here. But the Russians continue to try to frustrate us and needle us and push us. I would just tell you, it's not going to work. Absent their willingness to use actual military force, which would not end well for them, there's no way that they can actually push us out of the airspace. And again, I don't think they want conflict, direct conflict with the United States. We certainly don't want direct conflict with Russia. So to me, it's kind of akin to a gnat swirling around your head. It's very frustrating and annoying sometimes, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. So my proposal to them has always been, hey, let's return to adherence of the protocols in a professional manner. That's what they ought to be focusing on. We ought to all get back to focusing on ISIS, and I hope they decide to do that.
I want to thank you for tuning in to day one of the Defense One Tech Summit. We hope that you'll join us again tomorrow for day two, either in person at the Ronald Reagan Building in downtown DC or right here virtually. Have a great evening.
All right. Thanks again, Marcus. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the conversation.